Take us through your viewing experience of the lottery last night.
Yeah, I was standing beside Matt's, and he kept telling me how he's not going to win. It's not going to happen, and I kept trying to keep him optimistic. And he's a lucky Swede, so we got it done.
So, John, you have a plan heading into the lottery draft last night, and then you win it. Does that potentially change your plan, or does that just give you more options?
The nice part is we just started. So, while we have a plan kind of how we're thinking about building out the organization, we didn't have a plan in the draft yet. And so knew that there was optionality of what would happen. And obviously there was a wide range, from winning, which we ultimately did, to losing the pick even. And we were kind of thinking about and planning for all of those circumstances. So, obviously the best outcome possible happened. And it's luck's, a funny thing, and you need it to have success long term, and that's a big one.
Does this speed up the process of getting familiar with scouts and everybody's books on these prospects? I know there's a bunch of players that are at the top of the class this year, John, but as far as you're concerned, you must want to get as much info as you want on the top guys that are going to be available.
Yeah, you know what? We had a few meetings already scheduled for today, so it ended up lining up well. But honestly, I mean, these guys, they're out, every day of the year, and for these players now, they've seen them over multiple years. So it's always about getting a good book on the players, and I got a lot of confidence in the group we have here. It's a veteran group. I spent some time with them today. Feel really comfortable with where they have things, and again, it's a big decision, and we got to be thorough and we got to be diligent. But I have no reservations that this group's not prepared to make the right decision.
Always curious in terms of the role the GM plays in the actual draft picks. In other words, I can't imagine you're watching, hundreds and hundreds of prospects, and once you get to the 5th and 6th and 7th round, I'm sure you have to rely on your scouts to tell you this is the guy we should go for, or this is the guy that fits whatever we're looking for. How does that apply to the first overall pick? Like your specific role in knowing the 4 or 5 guys that are on the short list? Is it basically, Are you going to work even more on this pick because you can narrow it down to 2 or 3 guys?
It's a great question. I would just say, I think every manager is different in how they approach the draft. Certainly some guys, that's how they were brought up, and that's what they love to do, and they're super involved and super engaged, and that's great. I think for my seat, I'm always a big process guy. It's a really hard thing to do, and it's one of the most challenging problems I've ever come across in life. And I just find that their experience, their intuition, what they've gone through, how they've learned, the mistakes they've made, the adjustments they've made over decades are super important. And so, obviously, the first overall pick's an organizational pick. It's an important one to get right, and we'll dig in, and I'll be a part of that process. But I would say, honestly, my part is a part of it. At the end of the day, though, it will be on my record, and I own that. And but at the same time, that's why you have to, have a good staff and empower them to do a good job.
John, you're data-driven. Have you noticed scouting and the way that scouting has been processed changed over the years? And I'll give you an example is maybe watching prospects through video instead of actually being in the building to watch them.
Yeah, sure. I think as just any business evolves, new technologies come out and you evolve your process. I think that one of the challenges of scouting is, and especially in hockey specifically, just have this massive player pool across, different continents. And so, if you're one person trying to get a good feel for the entire draft, it's almost impossible to get a good sample size. You can do it, you can see everybody, but I think it's a bit of a supplement. And how can you use data, use video, use it, in-person experiences, just get the fullest picture possible. And like I said, even after you've done all of that, it's a very challenging decision to make, and you're trying to blend all these things in a really artistic way, as opposed to just being pure science. But I think anyone that's gone through it and done it has got the humility to understand that viewings are helpful, and certainly being live and feeling it and seeing stuff away from the puck brings a lot to the table. But if you're also just trying to make sure that you're not missing anything and seeing players in different segments of the season or against different competition, supplementing some of those viewings can be really valuable.
So data has been brought up twice in this interview already, and you're associated with that word.
Yeah.
We have a new segment on our show that we're heavily involved with it. We talk about it too. Like, what does that mean for people listening, that you're described as a data guy, analytics? Like, as far as your view on a hockey team and your association with this, how does it all come together, and how do you kind of view things?
Yeah, I mean, my approach and my view is, as you guys know as well as I do, or better, like, it's just really hard to win in the National Hockey League. There's a ton of really smart people doing great work, lots of experience. They got a lot of knowledge. And so you're always trying to find an edge, an advantage, something different, not trying to play the exact same game as everybody else and just hope the ping pong balls hit every year for you. Like, what can you do that's different that kind of gives you a right to win? And, look, with my background and some of the experiences I've had, I feel like I've got a lot of experience in the data side. Having said that, I think no matter what your background experience is, you have to be, cognizant of not over-indexing to something or under-indexing in another way. So for me, it's just, I really believe in, the power of the room. Like I've said before, I think, again, these are really hard decisions. So if you get the best people around the table, put all the information on the table in terms of quantitative or qualitative evaluations, your book on the players, anything you've got on them in terms of intangibles. And just, it's hard, you're trying to weight all these things in different ways, and it's always different, depending on the player and the situation and the part of the draft that you're in, and it'll evolve, and it's never the same weighting. But ultimately, you have to be right when you make your pick. And when you do that, you want to have a lot of conviction that you've turned over every stone, you've looked at it from every different angle, and then you got to make a judgment call.
With John Chayka, GM of the Maple Leafs. So, intangibles, physicality, intimidation, they all play a role in the sport. You, again, I think maybe fairly or unfairly, you've been labeled as just the data guy, just it's all a science, and you're going to put the numbers together. Do you want to address that and how important you think it is in terms of building the Leafs in the future to make sure there is a physical element to their game? They can fight if they have to fight, like all the different things that also come with the sport. Where do you stand on that, and how would you address Leaf fans that are wondering, your stance on that part of the game?
Yeah, I'd just say, like, much like any fan, turn on playoff hockey, and it doesn't take you long to figure it out. I mean, it's a battle out there. You got to be ready physically and mentally to go out and compete at that level. Obviously, that's a reason why Matt Sundin's a big part of what we're doing. He's a guy that's been in those situations and knows what it takes. He'll be a big part of our decision-making process. And, we're going to surround ourselves with lots of individuals like Matt's, or have similar or different backgrounds that can bring those elements to the table and understanding of what it means. But I would just say, like if you're going to win, you got to be good across the board. And certainly at this time of year, you need those elements that you raised, but you also need to be, the pace of these games is also noticeable. And not just the pace of skating, but decision making and reads and making plays under pressure and escaping pressure and making a play. So I think our job is to not miss those elements that you suggested, because those are clearly part of the recipe. But also have a well-rounded team that no matter the opponent, you have a diversified attack that can match up well against anybody.
John, you just mentioned the other general managers around the league, that everyone does good work and everyone's trying to win. There's been a lot of speculation about your specific relationships with these people. Like, in your estimation, do you want to speak to that? Like, what do you think your relationship is? And I know there's some different people moving around. The deck chairs are different. How do you think your relationship is, from your view, with other GMs around the league?
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. I think from my side, I would say, the folks that I know, which is a large majority, I think I have pretty good relationships with. And I would just point to my history of making transactions. And we made quite a few in Arizona as we were trying to kind of move that team around and get into a competitive position. I think the main theme is that whenever you're trying to, make a deal or create a transaction, that, there's a two sides to the equation, and you're trying to understand what they're trying to accomplish, and you're trying to accomplish something for your club as well. So by no means am I looking to make friends or or anything like that. I'm trying to, do the best thing in the interest of the Toronto Maple Leafs. That's my loyalties, and that's where that lies. And, for Edward Rogers and Keith Pelly and the whole staff, that's my focus. But at the same time, I think in order to get transactions done consistently, you got to be honest and forthright and direct in your dealings. And like I said, historically, I've been able to do that.
Well, and Keith Pelly the other day obviously was not concerned, and was not concerned about your history and your time in Arizona, the way you left Arizona, and he said you impressed him with your vision. Can you shed any light on that? Not necessarily your full blueprint of the next 3 to 5 years for the Leafs, but what do you think you did in particular to tip the scales and have Keith Pelly in the end choose you as the GM?
Yeah, again, that's a good question for Keith. But from my perspective, I think obviously, resources aren't a problem in Toronto. Again, the directive from Edward Rogers to me is to do whatever it takes to win a Stanley Cup. I take that seriously. I think as we think about how we can again gain a competitive advantage, it's not just resources; it's being resourceful. And I think coming from a place like Arizona, it teaches you a lot about that. And so how can you be really disciplined in your decision making, how you can be really disciplined in how you spend money in a cap system. Even though you can spend in the cap, it still matters how you spend those dollars. And so I think combining resourcefulness with the resources could be a blueprint of how we continue to evolve the organization. And again, I would just say, I think there's been a lot of good things done here over a decade too. And so we're certainly not looking to throw the baby out with the bathwater in any way, shape, or form. There's a lot of good people that have done a lot of good work over a long period of time. And Matt's and I are coming in with a different slant and maybe a fresh perspective. And we're going to try to iterate on things. But I think ultimately Keith was looking for someone that could come in and bridge some between some departments and try to again take what's here and bring it to another level.
Your opening statement the other day in your press conference, you said you were younger and a lot different in Arizona. This is a different beast here in Toronto. I mean, how different are you, and how different is your approach going to be? You've talked about it with more resources, but is it more about relationships or more about just you maturing, and second time around, you're looking for a different approach?
Yeah, look, I think a little bit of all the above. I was 26. I was dating. Now I'm 36. I'm married. I've got 3 kids. Life changes, and so I'm always looking to get better and improve and do different things. Obviously, done some things now on the business side in different formats, and look to bring some big best practices from there as well. But I'd say spend a lot of time in global sports, global football, baseball. NBA even, the common theme is always the human element. There's just a human connectivity and a pulse and a heartbeat to these environments. And, again, I think you can have the most talented teams in the world. I don't think that's going to get the job done. And so while talent is a necessary part of the equation, I don't think it's a sufficient part. And, anything we can do here with the Leafs to continue to build up culture. And again, that's why I love having Matt Sundin as a partner in this, and someone who knows the market, has lived it, has felt the weight of it, but has also embraced what it is and what it means. I don't have that exact perspective, of course. And so, having the best front office matters.
So as far as the culture that's in place, how are you going to dig down and drill down on the culture that's already here? Are you just going to have to ask around, get to know guys? Have you spoken to Auston Matthews, William Nylander about what's up here and what's been happening? Or how are you going to find all these things out?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think it is just having conversations. And so the last 2 days we've been kind of in the boardroom here, buckled down and trying to meet with everyone, from the chef to the equipment staff to the coaches. We're going to go through and talk to them and get their perspective. I'm just a big believer. Again, we're on the outside. We don't know what we don't know. And so having those conversations and digging deep and trying to, have real honest conversations about where we're at. And there's been great perspective already. People that are in the room every day that just have a pulse on what's going on. And the question isn't what's gone on in the past. The question is, where do we go from here? How do we get better? How do we elevate things? Obviously, it was a disappointing season for everyone. And but at the same time, I think there's a lot of resolve in the group. There hasn't been, that missed playoff experience in a long time. And our hope is that, this group can benefit from that, actually, use some of that adversity in a positive way and bounce back.
Well, with that in mind, there was a report in The Athletic this week that Auston Matthews is uncertain if he's even going to return next year. Is that your understanding of where Matthews is at right now, and how would you approach that report?
That's not my understanding. I think, Austin's invested a lot of his career, his entire NHL career, into the Toronto Maple Leafs. And, I think that's been an affirmative decision on his behalf. And, I think as he evaluates his career and, what the next decade of his career looks like, I think it's important that he feels a connectivity, an alignment. He has a similar vision and passion that we do. And so, we'll have those conversations and get together and share notes. And honestly, I want to be a good listener. He's the captain. It's his room. He's been through the ups and downs of this market. Obviously, Matt's is a unique perspective to share as well, and I'm sure there'll be some good back and forth in that regard. But I totally understand the perspective of, you only have so many years as a player, and it goes by quick, as you guys know. And you want to make sure that you feel fully aligned and engaged in what's going on. And I have no problem, having those conversations, sharing our thoughts, learning, seeing if there's a shared common vision, and charting a path forward.
John, Keith Pelly, in a roundabout way, a few different times, thinks that with some of the cornerstone pieces, as he labeled them, with some additions and possibly being healthy, that this team can turn it around and get back into contention of some sort, I guess, for the Stanley Cup next year. Do you share in that belief? Was that a big part of the interview process, what your thoughts were on this team and how quickly they could turn around, if that's even possible? Some think it's not.
Yeah, I would just share my perspective, which is, we spent some time on, this roster this season, walking through the players. I'd say it's a very small portion of the interview process. The much larger part of the process was organizational building, a vision for what world-class organization looks like, how we can be the best in class across, all these different departments and integrate them in a really effective way to create a competitive advantage for the long term for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So as we're doing that and evaluating that right now and trying to find, the best ways to put this thing on solid foundation, not just for my tenure, but hopefully, into the future. We also believe very strongly that, we owe it to the players, first and foremost, the fans, ownership, to, put the best team on the ice next year. And, I think you got to do that in a way that's thoughtful and constructive. This isn't something where we're building a team for one season. But at the same time, I do think we need to, continue to push this team ahead, generate some momentum and get some positivity back.
So as far as next year, do you think that this team could turn around and be competitive and compete for a Stanley Cup with some additions, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think, look, I think, again, as I sit here today in May, the season played out and, the result as well as I do. And so obviously the answer as we sit here today is that they're not the contending club that we'd like to be.
Okay.
We got a full off season. We're going to go hard. We're going to give it everything we got. I'm very committed to that. I think we got some world-class players, and those players deserve our best efforts to put the best team on the ice, under the constraints and the realities of trying to do that while other 31 teams are trying to do the same. But it won't be from a lack of effort on our side. And, as we get into training camp, I'm happy to address that question with more specificity. But, I can say anything in May, as you know. It's more about what it looks like as we enter the season.
Yep, absolutely. Well, John, you're the first guest to come on since debuted his new ponytail, so we appreciate you keeping a straight face throughout the whole thing.
Staring into the screen
tough.
at that.
It was tough.
And next time, I'm sure he'll be back to a tight fade.